During this video, we're going to show you all the details about how to get this shot. I recently posted this on Facebook and I got this comment. It said, I really want to know how this picture is so clear and pure. Also, how it almost looks like a fairy tale. So during this video, we're going to take you from A to Z on how to get this shot. Hello, I'm Paul Fontanelli and this is photographytv.com. Before we get started, let me encourage you to check out our free ebook on how to take better pictures, where I'll give you 10 tips for capturing the best images of your life. All right, so now let's go ahead and get started on how to get this shot. And this shot was taken at Olympic National Park, and this is Sol Duc Falls. And so what we'll do, we'll take you through 3 components of getting this shot. First, we'll talk about composition. Then we'll talk about how we captured the shot and the settings and things like that went into it. And then third, we'll go into Lightroom and show you the exact way that we edited this photo. So let's get started with composition. You know, composition, when you're framing up any shot, is critical to be thinking about. And in this case, when I got to the location, I explored just a few different angles and different locations that I want to shoot from. So I shot first from the bridge looking down at the waterfalls, and then where I ultimately landed, which is where this shot is I found a little place down the side looking back at the waterfall. And what I liked about this angle in this composition is what it did is it added a sense of depth to the scene. Just having the waterfall, having the little bushes there in the front, even this tree limb that's hanging down in the front, all of that adds depth to the scene. Then you add the trees and the bridge in the background. That layer of composition, that look of depth is critical, especially in a landscape type shot. So any photo is obviously only 2-dimensional, but if you can find ways to create depth and make it feel like it's 3-dimensional, that's going to have a really important piece to the look of the photo. And then the last thing for composition is I was thinking about the rule of thirds. So when I was trying to figure out where I wanted to put the waterfall in the shot, I didn't want it right in the middle of the frame. I knew that the waterfall was the main subject, so I thought about putting it in the bottom third of the frame. And so rule of thirds is a really important compositional technique. And those are a few thoughts about just framing the shot up with a different angle, making sure there is depth to the scene, and then using the rule of thirds. And so next, it came time to actually take the shot. And one thing that really helped this shot look so clean and pure, ultimately gave it that fairy tale look as the comment was made, is that the light was really good for this type of shot. And so anytime you're in a forest or heavily treed area, the type of light that you want is an overcast. You don't want super bright, sunny daylight in a forest because it's just going to be too harsh on the leaves. You're not going to really get those greens to pop out. So overcast was key. What really helped this shot as well is that it had just previously rained minutes before this shot was taken. So there was a little bit of water on all of the trees. Again, overcast really helped. So we even had the benefit that the clouds parted just a little, and you can see in the far back there was some light beaming, shining through that just added another sense of really uniqueness to this shot. So light was absolutely key to this capture. And then the next thing I'll talk about for the capture is the gear I use, because a lot of people do want to know, well, what'd you use to get that shot? So to get that shot, I used my Sony A99 camera, which is my primary camera. But for a lens, I actually used a Bauer lens. And the reason I use this lens is this is an ultra wide angle lens. It's a fixed prime lens at 14 millimeters. So I needed a really wide lens. And this Bauer is one that I bought. The key to this was only about a $250 lens. It is a prime lens. It's a 2.8 aperture. That's not what I took this shot at. I'll get to that in a moment. But it is a manual lens. It's a manual focus and a manual aperture. So that just means it's going to take a little bit more time to set the shot up. Instead of being able to autofocus and set the settings, I have to manually set the aperture, which that's really easy to do, and then manually focus. And so focus is a really important thing when you're setting up a shot. Make sure it's sharp, make sure it's detailed. In this case, I just did a manual focus, which I don't mind doing for landscapes because there's really nothing moving. It's pretty easy to get focus if you've got the time to set it up. I would never want manual focus if I was trying to shoot my son's baseball game. as an example. But that was the gear that was used. Sony A99 14mm Bauer lens, which I've been pretty happy with this for the cost of a couple $100 or so. So that's the gear. And so the next thing I'll talk about for the capture are the settings that I use, the settings for the exposure triangle to make sure I got the shot that I wanted. So I was obviously shooting in manual exposure mode, and the settings were, I put it to ISO 50 because it's daylight and I needed to bring down the amount of brightness or light as much as I could. My camera can go all the way down to ISO 50. So it was ISO 50. I needed a shutter speed of about 3 seconds. It was in fact 3.2 seconds was the exact shutter speed. And I needed that longer shutter speed to get that silky effect in the waterfall. So the longer shutter speed was going to allow me to do that. And then because I brought the ISO down to 50 and the aperture was set to f/16, that's a really narrow aperture. The ISO of 50, the really narrow aperture of 16 allowed me to have a longer exposure of about 3 seconds, even in daylight. Now it helped that it was overcast. It helped that we were behind the trees. I didn't actually have to use an ND filter for this particular shot, but those were the exposure settings. Shutter speed of about 3 seconds, aperture of f/16, ISO of 50. So understanding the exposure triangle is critical to be able to control the type of image that I want to capture. So those were what I did at location to capture the shot in the camera, which is critical to ultimately be able to get the shot output that you want. Setting up the composition, getting the right light, the right capture was a huge component in getting the ultimate shot. So the third piece we'll take you through is once I got back home and I edited the photo, what were the exact things I did in Lightroom to give it that extra little pop. So here's the final shot in Lightroom. This is after all the edits were done. And so what I'm going to do in Lightroom is I'm actually going to take you back to the beginning of this image and show you the before and the after. And so I didn't do too much to it in Lightroom, but you can definitely see a difference on the before and the after to really get that effect that I wanted in the final image. And so what I'm going to do, let me go ahead and create a virtual copy here so I can start from the beginning and show you step by step what I did for the edit. So here we go. I've just created a virtual copy. I'm going to go ahead and reset to the beginning. All right, and so here's the true raw image with no edits made to it. And I'm going to go step by step for exactly how I edited it. In this case, I didn't have to make any crops. I was happy with how it was out of the camera. But the first thing I started with was the white balance. And I felt it was just a little too cool. So I brought the temperature up just a little bit. I think I brought it up to just a little over 5,200. And then the tint, I felt it was just a little purple, so I just brought that down just a hair. And so that was a very minor white balance adjustment, but it's always good to test the white balance, make sure you get the color tone looking a little bit with where you want it. And then from here, I went into the basic edits. And so I touched on the exposure just a tad. Take a look at that. I think I felt pretty comfortable with where the exposure was. I didn't have to make many changes there. I almost always bring contrast up just a little bit to make it pop a little bit more. And then in this case, because that sun started to peek through, which was really nice because it gave me some beams on the light here, but it really is starting to blow this out, even clipping it to some extent up here in the top. I really wanted to bring those highlights down. So I brought the highlights down. And so one thing you can do with highlights is as you hit the Option key and you hold it down, it'll actually show you if it's white there that it's clipping, and you obviously don't want clipping. So as you bring that down, you want to remove some of that clipping, and it did it there. But I even went a little bit further in bringing the highlights down just because I really wanted to pull those down. And then for shadows, because it is a forest, you can see the histogram is showing, there's some pretty deep shadows in there. I just wanted to bring those over a little bit, try to brighten up some of the shadows. And then I tweaked the whites and the blacks just a little bit to create, again, some more definition and tone, make it pop a little bit more. And then in clarity, I played with clarity just a little bit. I probably pushed clarity more on this photo than I normally do, but I just felt as I kept testing it, it really just made some clear definition that I liked. So I just kept going with clarity until I felt that it was probably adding a little bit too much. In this case, 30 range or so felt pretty good. And I definitely wanted to pull some of the colors up to make it really vibrant and pop and stand out was the goal of the vibrance here. So those were my basic edits, but you can see it still doesn't have quite the tone and the look that I really wanted in the end. So it's just a little too green right now. I'll show you a few things that I'm going to do about that, but it's also just feels a little hot, feels a little bright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of an S curve, which I feel just really helps to kind of tone things down. Would add just a little bit of what I think is like a little bit of a matte, photo matte type look. And I always like the way that looks, just a little bit of an S curve there. And then coming in to the colors. This is where I felt, there's definitely an opportunity here. The greens feel to be just too bright. I wanted that vibrance up earlier, but not at the expense of just making these greens really they almost look too neon. So what I did is I came into saturation and I pulled the saturation down a little bit just on the greens to try to minimize that neon look of the greens and make it look a little bit more natural, but letting some of the other colors really stand out and pop so that the entire image just didn't feel overwhelmed by green. So that was a way to just bring this one color tone down in saturation. All right, so moving down, this is pretty much my workflow. I just start to kind of go down the list, figuring out what the edits are that I need to make. I may bounce from one to the other. But in this case, you can see I loved that the sun was coming through here, and you can even see some of the beams, but this is just a really bright light that's somewhat distracting. So what I needed to do is find a way to make that light somewhat blend in to the rest of the colors. And the easy way to do that is through split toning, to take my highlights and start to influence what the color of the highlights are. And so I wanted somewhat of a yellow tinge to the highlights. So I brought that there, and then the intensity of it, I brought up just a little bit, nothing too dramatic to bring the split toning in. But what that allowed it to do, you can see as I turn it back off, is it took that really bright white light and made it somewhat of a yellow light and brought those highlights to blend more into the forest and not be such a distraction by being so bright. Again, it's a minor adjustment, but you can really see the effect when you turn it off and then we turn it back on. You can see that's why I did just a little bit of split toning to try to bring that color tone in. And then the last thing to do, because this is a raw shot, is I go in and I add just a little bit of sharpening to really kind of bring the sharpness up. Because this was shot in RAW and it doesn't have that sharpening built into it. And then same with noise reduction. There's not a lot of noise in this. Obviously I was shooting at ISO 50, but I still like to bring that up just a little bit to try to process the image because it was ultimately a RAW shot. And so there you have it. At that point, I would say that's really the final edit. You can see all of the pushing, the pulling that I did on the different basics, tone curve, etc. And that'll take you through the edit of this particular shot to get that look, to get that feel that I was going for. And here's the before, and then here's the after. And so again, doesn't make dramatic changes to it. Edit should just be able to really just add a little bit of pop, a little bit of differential in what you're looking to pull out of the image. But really what captured this shot was what was done on location, getting the right composition, setting the exposure to where it needed to be, and then the benefit of the light really working out in that situation. So that's how to get this shot of the Sol Duc Falls at Olympic National Park. Thanks for watching this video on photographytv.com. Please subscribe to us on YouTube and click the link below to get your free ebook on taking better pictures and 10 tips to capturing the best images of your life. Go to this image, and what we're gonna do, I need to actually record my screen. That would help. Getting the capture is the settings that I used. And so for this particular shot, I have to look it up. Hold on. What we'll do is we'll take you through the details of where this shot was taken. No, we're not gonna do that. Free ebook on how to take better pictures. I'll give you 10 tips on how to